Extra, extra, read all about it. Staten Island socialite murdered in her own bed. Police have no clue. Read all about it, only a nickel.
In the 1890s, the police reported that Magda Hamilton Crowley came racing into the Staten Island Police Department one morning, and she was furious. She began screaming that she had been woken up in the middle of the night by Estelle Crowley standing next to her bed. She was hideous looking. Most of her hair and teeth were missing. She had dark, deep creases in her face, and she was clutching her porcelain doll. Magda knew she had come to kill her, and she just barely got to the bathroom and locked the door in the nick of time. And then she turned to face the police chief and said, "Why did you not tell me she had escaped from prison?"
The police chief simply shook his head and said, "Miss Crawley, you could not have seen Estelle Ridley because Estelle Ridley died in prison. Look, right there in the paper. Just a few days ago, she passed away in the prison. You must have had a nightmare, a bad dream. You need to go back home."
This information provided no comfort to Magda. The police chief could not convince her to leave until he promised her a police escort back home and a thorough search of her mansion on Staten Island. And then he had to finally agree to give her 3 full days of police protection.
And so it was. She went back home. And 3 nights, nothing happened except she was nervous and restless, didn't sleep much. But after the police left, it grew quiet. And then she was murdered. The police came and investigated and found her body in the bed. She had been suffocated. And they looked, there was no murder weapon, there were no clues about, nothing. The only thing they found were strands of dark curly mohair on her pillow and across her face.
Now tonight, maybe you'll figure out who did murder Magda Hamilton Crowley and with what, once you learn her story.
The story started about 1870. Steamships were plying the route between Europe and America, and everyone who was everyone, the rich and famous, sailed on these ships, displaying all their wealth, including all their fancy jewelry. And this attracted international jewel thieves, gangs that came on the ship and stole those jewels, and it was quite a crime, but the New York police were on it. They busted several of these gangs, but there was one gang that kept eluding them. And maybe it's because they never suspected that the leader of this gang was a 6-year-old orphan child.
Fanchon Moncaire was a charming little girl. She loved skipping up and down the deck, always holding her little porcelain doll. And she visited with the other people on the deck. And she always had her governess by her side, the young and lovely Ada Danforth. Now, Ada Danforth would explain to the other travelers that little Fanchon was the sadly orphan daughter of a young, wealthy couple who had tragically died in a fire, and that once Fanchon turned 18, she would inherit her parents' wealth.
Now, Fanchon became kind of a favorite amongst the women on the ship. They felt sorry for her and took her under their wing, and they talked to her a lot, and she innocently would ask them, those pretty jewels you wear, aren't you afraid those jewel thieves will get them? And they would tell her, oh no, we have special places to hide them. Where's that? Well, later in the cruise, she would be entertaining the women when Ada would sneak away to their staterooms and steal those hidden jewels.
And of course, once the theft was discovered, the ship would be topsy-turvy. Every room would be scoured. Every traveler had to bring out every trunk, bag, suitcase, purse, empty it out and have it thoroughly inspected. No one could even get down the gangplank without being carefully checked over. Everyone except a sweet little orphan girl.
And so it was that Ada and little Fanchon would traipse down the gangplank with little Fanchon clutching her little doll tightly. When they got out of the sight of the police, they would pry the head off the doll, and inside its hollow body were all the jewels that had gone missing. And they took those jewels to their associates, the fences, who were not averse to purchasing stolen jewels.
Now, you would assume that it would have been Ada Danforth who would have done the haggling with these purveyors of stolen booty. But, oh no, it was Fanchon. As a matter of fact, Fanchon was known to drive such hard bargains and to curse at those buyers with such foul language that she came to be known as the daughter of Satan himself, which was probably not too far from the truth.
Now, perhaps by now you've figured out yourself that little Fanchon was not a 6-year-old girl at all. As a matter of fact, she was nearly 40 years old. But as an adult, she had only grown to the size of a 6-year-old child, and she took advantage of that. Her real name was Estelle Ridley, and Estelle Ridley had a criminal past and a reputation amongst the dark underworld of New York crime as a ruthless thief.
Now, this jewelry theft enterprise proved quite lucrative quite quickly. Why, on one trip alone, it was known that they stole over $250,000 worth of jewelry. Today's money, that is almost $8 million. They were doing so well that Estelle bought for herself a mansion on Staten Island, and it barely put a dent in her bank account. But she was not happy. Instead of settling down to a life of leisure wealth, she decided she wanted more. So in order to pull that off, she decided that she was going to also start pulling scams in the United States, and that would require another accomplice. So she brought in a young, lovely Magda Hamilton.
Now, Magda and Hamilton and Estelle loved their rich mansion, and they lived a good life, but then came a man. That's right. This handsome man came along. It was kind of really Ada's boyfriend, but Magda made eyes, and you know how that goes. They really got mad at each other. As a matter of fact, Magda stopped talking to Ada at all. And then Estelle, in her bargaining, cheated her out of her money when they stole money from a rich Chicago businessman. It was quite a scam, but poor Magda was so mad. She was so mad that when they left to go on one of their treasure hunting cruises again, she went to the police. They offered a big reward for capturing these jewel thieves, so she turned it in and bargained her own prison sentence down to almost nothing.
It was a few weeks later, when Estelle and Ada returned from one of their latest on-the-seas escapades, and as they trotted down the gangplank with Estelle in her little 6-year-old girl dress with her little doll tucked under her arm, just as she reached the bottom, they were met by the New York City Police Department, who jerked the doll away from Fanchon, pried its head off, and exposed the jewels.
So it was in all the papers. Extra, read all about it. Gang busted. And then there was the great sensational trial, and with the help of her testimony, poor Ada got 20 years in prison. And then Estelle Ridley, she got life without parole.
Now, when Magda took the stand to testify against Estelle Ridley, Estelle leapt up and pointed at her and said, "I will get revenge on you for betraying me." But Magda was smug about the whole thing. She didn't care. She knew Estelle Ridley was going to die in prison.
And then Magda went to the mansion, and then she met that man they had been arguing over. His name was Dartway. That's a hard name. Dartway Crawley. This is a true story. Dartway Crawley was a member of the Tammany Hall, the Boss Tweed's corrupt government. And as such, he had lots of money, and he bought that mansion for his new bride. Magda and him lived in wedded bliss for nearly a year before he got wanderlust and decided to head off to California. So he divorced Magda, and you'd think she was heartbroken. Nah, she still had the mansion, had lots of money, had New York society. She was a happy person to have her own freedom.
Well, as a matter of fact, with the reward money she still had, along with the settlement money she had gotten from Dartway, and all of her friends that she had met through Dartway associated with Tammany Hall and all of their business connections, she soon parlayed that small fortune into a great big fortune. And now rich, beautiful, scandalous, and a daring divorcee, Magda Hamilton found herself the new darling of New York City cafe society.
And so it was that Magda was living the good life until that fateful night. That fateful night when that little woman with that little doll showed up by her bed. She ran to the police and escaped, but the police didn't believe her. They didn't believe her. They guarded her for 3 nights, but then on that 4th night, she was killed. The police came in and investigated the crime scene, and they found no weapon, no suspects. The only clue they had was that on Magda's face and pillow were dark, curly strands of mohair.
Now I know that somebody in the police department could have figured out what the murder weapon had been if they'd just taken the time to go into that dusty evidence room and look around, because eventually somebody would have noticed that Fanchon Moncair's porcelain doll, the one with dark curly hair made from mohair, had gone missing.
The true story of the murder on Staten Island.